Okay, so if you made it this far into the video and you noticed it got cut off pretty quickly, we kind of set this up. We ran out of hard drive space. I mean, it was about 2 hours and 20 minutes was the presentation, and
almost
it went for another 40 minutes, right?
Oh yeah, we went on forever.
Audience
for the live
Q&A.
audience,
Audience Q&A. We did the whole thing. Yeah.
So yeah, if it seemed a little awkward the way it ended, that's why.
Yeah. It had to end, whether we had the hard drive space or what people might think of as tape. We had to end it anyway because we had to get out of the venue.
We had to clean up.
Yeah.
Take down all the wires.
It was a mad dash to get out of there. So
and the one thing that people should know is that the cameras, the microphones, the cables, all that, we had to break down this entire studio.
It was just us.
Mostly Dan. You did a lot of it, Dan.
No, you guys all pitched in. I mean, we're throwing stuff in everyone's car and your van, and it was a lot.
Then we had to come back and put it all back together.
So if you see this and you want to do something like this, you got to pay us a good amount of money.
Yeah, don't call us.
Money talks. If you pay us, we will do this again. If you won't pay us,
I don't know. Even if there was money, I still think about it. It's like, I don't know if I want to do this.
you throw more bodies at it. That would have been so much easier. Yeah.
But it was fun.
It was fun.
And I still have a lot of people coming up saying, one, when we get to see it, so that they just saw it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the other one is, you're going to do it again. So I don't know. We'll have to get some more sleep.
Well, I think let's put it to our audience. If you want us to do more, if you're listening to this or watching this, comment, like, obviously, follow, subscribe, and all that stuff. Tell us what you want to hear. What should we cover? We'd love to hear what you guys want.
We get lots of opportunities for live events. People are hitting us up to cover live events,
this is
to
true.
do our show from events. Now, we could do our podcast at events.
Right.
This wasn't really a podcast. This was something a little different. But west of Tulsa, we are a production entity. So we're making short films. We're doing the podcast. Yeah. We want to make these long-form content.
At the end of the day, we're storytellers. So we don't do event coverage, which is, I thought, interesting that people that have these events want us to do our podcast at their event, because we don't cover events, but we cover stories. And maybe that's why they want us there, is to cover the stories at the event or whatever.
Well, if you go to a car show, you sit there and stare at the car, but you don't get to hear the stories about the car. That's usually the problem at a car show. So I mean, so it would be nice to be able to do that.
Exactly.
So maybe we'll catch up on sleep, and then we'll consider it.
Yes.
All right. That was fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad we did it. It's now on tape. We can go back at any time and listen to those guys.
It'll be on YouTube, so we can refer people to it. And
absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. So as Gabe just mentioned, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe. Go to our YouTube
channel.
Yes.
How many videos do we have on there now?
Is it
252, did you say?
253.
253.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
You've been working hard there, Gabe.
Yeah. By the time this episode airs, we'll have probably a dozen more.
300. Yeah.
So maybe we'll get there.
So the other thing is we have our tip line.
Yes.
Yeah, go to westoftulsa.com, click on the tip line page, fill it out. We'd love to have you here in studio and hear your story. All right. We hope you enjoyed the special presentation of the West of Tulsa.
We talk about Santa Barbara Airport races. You guys ready? I know you are. We'll talk about the Santa Barbara Airport races.
Yeah.
All
I don't know how many times I raced out there, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a safe track. You couldn't get in any trouble.
Huge crowds.
Huge crowd. You ever look at I'm thumbing through a program I still have, and I couldn't believe there's almost 300 cars entered in that race, and they raced 2 times a year, once around Easter and then again at Labor Day. It was very well attended. A lot of big-time drivers were there. Belchowski, Lance Raventlow, Phil Hill, of course. It was an amazing time. Now, in fact, Dolores remembers all of that. The track is all different now. You couldn't put a racetrack out there anymore. All the roads are gone. A lot of them are gone. It was a great time though. To get ready for a race, you'll get a kick out of this. We took the windshield off, took the muffler off, and taped up the headlights, and that was it. That was it. That was your prep.
Chip, did your dad race out there?
I believe it was 1953 that he raced there.
Isn't that the first year?
I don't remember. I don't know what the first year was.
Yeah, 53.
Orwin will know.
When is it?
53 was the
Tony
first
would
year.
know. Yeah, so it was pretty
So he
close
raced
to
there in 53.
52.
Right.
52?
Well, that's when it first started.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was interesting. I was up at the Monterey auction. I think it was in, I don't remember what year, 2010 or 2011. And they have the auction there, and I found a Santa Barbara road race 1953 poster. Wow. It was red. It was 20 inches by 40 inches. And I bought it knowing that I'm going to give this to my father for his birthday. And I brought it back and I slid it behind my flat files in my office. And when my dad's birthday was coming around, I went over there to grab it, and somebody had taken it. Oh. I've been devastated because I never got to give it to my father. But it was later, then I thought, well, it was RM Auction, so I called them up and I said, you had a picture in your catalog. I told them that I had lost the poster. And so they sent me the negative. And I went ahead and had a large print made. And I've just had that framed. I haven't hung it yet.
So if anybody sees that poster, tell Chip about
It's just red and white.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Oh, there is. There's somebody's holding one up back there. Is that pretty close? I can't see it. Yeah, I mean, the Santa Barbara races, some of the names out there, Phil Hill, Ken Miles, James Dean, Steve McQueen, they all raced out there. You guys know there was a movie out there that was shot. Tony Curtis shot a movie called Johnny Dark.
Yeah.
You guys remember that?
Yeah.
1953. And then from talking to Tony, I guess you can still see evidence of the drag strip out there, right?
Yes.
There's a little evidence of it, probably through the weeds.
Yeah. Was it, pardon me?
Yeah, you can still see the drag strip.
Oh, drag
Where the
strip.
drag strip was.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. Actually, the first, well, in 1948, it began to come together. We went out and the guys ran a few test runs and stuff. And actually, in 1949, I believe, was when we had the first invitationals open drag racing. And we're backed by the California Highway Patrol. They loved it. I mean, they even sent an officer out there to direct traffic after. So, I mean, they thought it was great. And there was some sponsors. Well, we didn't have any money sponsors, but they backed us in several other ways. But like the Blue Onion Restaurant and a couple other of the associated stores in Santa Barbara.
Tell a story about the quarter mile, the bridge.
Oh, the bridge, yeah. Well, at first, when we first started running out there, we painted a stripe on the pavement, and we didn't want to do standing starts because it was too hard on the axles and so forth. So we had this rolling start system. You rolled up to the line side by side, and when you hit the line, you took off. Well, then we didn't have real communications at first. So the only way you could tell who won was that at the end of the course, there was a bridge. It went across a little creek there, and the first car that jumped over the bridge, that's the one that won. Also, we had another problem. At the end of this road was Mr. Tom Stark's property, who was a very prominent person here in Santa Barbara, but he had blocked it off because this old road was left there by the Marine Corps when it was a Marine base. And this road was part of the Marine base course, and it used to go all the way up to where Isla Vista is now because that's where they had barracks and so forth for the. But when Mr. Stark acquired his property back again, he put a gate across there. Well, sometimes the guys couldn't stop, and they'd crash the gate, and we'd have to go repair the gate, and, make an apology. But it was quite an interesting time.
Was that a quarter mile?
Well, how that came about was originally it wasn't quite a quarter mile. But one of the fellows that came in later, he worked for a surveyor, so we got out there, and his name was Hugh Simpson. And he and a couple other guys, they measured this thing off. And they said, well, from here to up right past where you got your white line started is a quarter mile. So that's how we determined a quarter mile. And from then on, it was just a quarter mile.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
And Roy, you raced out there, right? You said Santa Barbara Airport races?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
From 1967 until 1998. No, 97, because I had to go to the runoffs in Florida with my race car, and I couldn't do both races. So, yeah, I raced there for about 10 years.
fond memories of it?
Oh, absolutely. I was living in LA at the time, and it was a big deal for my race car friends to come up here and kind of party and go racing at the same time. And so we made it a habit of having lunch at Mom's Cafe on Coda Street. And it was like we had a great tradition of knowing how to have a good time and go racing. And they're great people too. I mean, the best people on the planet. So, yeah.
I love seeing the old photos of it. They're great old photos of the races out in Santa Barbara.
Oh, yeah.
What brought about vintage racing? I mean, how did that, is there a delineation between, Santa Barbara races, vintage races, the same thing? Did it morph? I mean, what happened? Talk about the vintage racing part of this into the 60s and 70s.
Right. Old race cars were pretty much worthless at that point in time. An old race car was like yesterday's newspaper. Didn't have much purpose. And so they weren't worth much, and they just kind of deteriorated over time, and there wasn't really any interest in them. And Steve Earle, in 1974, came up with the idea of racing these old cars. Just let them race amongst themselves and see what happens. It was a home run. It just started a revolution all around the world, really, because all of a sudden, even in Europe, they started appreciating vintage race cars to this very day. And it makes a lot of people happy. Yeah. I think it's great.
Yeah, and Orwin, you raced.
Yeah,
races.
As Roy said, Steve, the first Monterey Historic race was 1974. I was there, I saw it. I saw an advertisement for it, and it was all about the types of cars that I really liked, that I would have really liked to have seen race when I was a kid, but I never got to go do that because there was nobody in my world that gave a damn about anything like that. So Steve had a bunch of friends that collected old Ferraris and Aston Martins and all of the really primo stuff. So he started this event, and 74, I think he had 75 cars. It grew to the point where within 5 years, he could take 320 cars, because that was all the pits were spec'd for, and he would have to turn away 1,000 cars because he had that many applications. Wow. And he hated doing that because he wanted everybody to go have a good time. So then he started a race prior to the Historics, a club weekend before it, and the racers, being racers, they called it the Prehistorics. Mm-hmm. And so that filled up. And so fortunately, I got to see, I've gone to Monterey every year since 1974. And I raced at the Historics for probably 20 or 25 years. But I think that was really when vintage racing started in this country. It was when Steve started doing it. The race cars in England, to the best of my knowledge, they never stopped racing. So they were racing vintage cars when they were 20, 30 years old. And it was vintage racing, but it was just current racing with old cars. And Steve was, he was really a stickler about the cars being prepared and run in the way they would have run at their point in time. And but he also had a rule, because he got cars to come out that became worth many millions of dollars, some of the old Ferrari race cars. And so he had a ruling that if you caused damage to somebody else's car, like in a crash or even a minor shunt, or to your own car when no other car was involved, he kicked you out for 13 months. And so that meant that you not only couldn't run all year, you couldn't run at the following year's historic races. Yeah. So he kept a pretty tight rein on that, and the races it became such a big deal to the collector car community. They started calling the week between the prehistorics and the historics Holy Week. And the Monterey Historic Race was held on the same weekend as the Pebble Beach Concours, which is, I guess, probably considered the premier concours in the world.
In the world.
Well, there's Villa d'Este, though, but anyway, that's another thing.
Didn't that kind of save Pebble a little bit, the beginning in '74?
It absolutely did. Well, they were running the Pebble Beach show since, I think, 1953 or 51 or something like that. And it got to the point that there was a few years they didn't have it because I guess people weren't coming to it. Steve came in with the historic races and combined with the Pebble Beach show, and it established this synergy, and he basically saved the show, I think, you know.
What year did they start, Orwin, what year did they start racing on the 17-mile drive?
Ooh, that was 51 or 2.
Okay.
And they also had the Pebble Beach show going then too.
Okay.
The 17-mile drive, they had they were running a race course through the 17, not on the entire 17-mile drive, but on a section right around where the lodge is. And fortunately, I have a book that was written about that, and I drove that course, not at speed, but just drove around it one time to see what it was like. And man, there was no good place to go off because you would hit a tree or something like that. In fact, they ran that up until 1956, and a fellow named Ernie McAfee was killed there in a Ferrari when he hit a tree. The next year, for that same weekend, they ran it at Laguna Seca because they were building the course. And also the residents were getting very huffy over the noise and the commotion that the race would create. So anyway.
Wow.
Well,
I have a comment about the drag race too, the quarter mile thing. I was fortunate enough to become a good friend of Bob Jenk, who was master engine builder. I wouldn't.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I would have dinner with Bob and June Jenk often, and we had a little team where we would go to the races, and Bob would be there, and I would be there with a race car, and Jenk was the official, and June was the official timer and everything. But anyway, he started this club called the Santa Barbara Acceleration Association. And Bob had a jacket patch that I would have loved to have had that thing. I think it was the only one he made, or maybe you have.
Oh, I had one. We had jackets made.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I have a picture of that in my old collection of pictures. My original jacket I had for many, many years, and then I met Mr. Wally Parks, who was the president of the what is now the
NHRA, National Hot
NHRA,
Rods.
which is the biggest drag race association in the world, I guess. But he had started a museum, and he was like, they had things donated to the museum and so forth. So I asked him. I said, "Well, would you be interested in this jacket?" And he said, "Yeah, well, you got to talk to so and so." So I did. Anyway, I later met his son, and I gave him the jacket to display. Well, it never got displayed.
Oh.
And I thought about it years later, and I think the reason was because we were not an NHRA association.
Right.
And so, but there are a couple of pictures in the museum of the glider drags, but.
Well, they were also the first. They were the first sanctioned off-street drag race.
Absolutely.
And Wally Parks had started the NHRA races at
Santa Ana.
Santa Ana, and they were every week.
Yeah.
Bob only did them.
Well, we ran once a month, maybe sometimes twice. Well, that reason that being is because a lot of the guys were still going to the dry lakes.
You're right.
And we try to have it in between so it wouldn't coordinate with the dry lakes meet.
Well, the dry lakes too. I think Bob explained that to me. To race your car, you had to drive 100 miles out in the desert.
Yes, you did.
And if you broke, you had a devil of a time getting back. And
well,
so
it's still the same place where Arlie ran this car.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's still the same.
Well, there was street racing going on, but it was more like contests of acceleration.
Yes.
And so Bob and the Santa Barbara Acceleration Association thought, well, why don't we make a competitive event for hot rods out of acceleration? So they did the very first one out at the airport. And the road, portions of the road are still there. It's where Aero Camino crosses over, and
right.
It's right on the other side. The buildings are still
There's a big building on the corner, and
right.
The buildings on the left, they were the maintenance buildings for the airport.
That's right. And so they laid this thing out, and there was a magazine from Los Angeles, this is what Bob told me, that came up to do a story on this because hot rodders were kind of the equivalent to Hell's Angels types back then. And this was going to get these guys off the street, make them clean cut, do the right thing and everything. So they came up, and a cameraman and somebody doing a story on it, and they said, "Oh, well, who did this? Who's responsible for doing?" So they pointed at Bob, and Bob was the type of guy that he didn't like interviews very much, but he was real sharp-witted, and he could think up real funny one-liners. So they went over there, and they started talking to Bob, and Bob starts explaining what this thing is. And they said, well, how far is it from the starting line down to the finish line down there? Bob didn't have a clue. He never measured it. They just went over. There was a guy on each side of the track, and whoever won, they would hold a flag up.
Well, we did eventually measure it and moved the line back a little ways. We were a little bit short.
Yeah,
feet short.
When they interviewed, he said he didn't have a clue who it was, so he says, "Oh, it's a quarter mile."
Well, we were very fortunate at that particular time that Bob's father, who was a very well-known and prominent man here in Santa Barbara, he had quite an interest in this type of an event. So he helped us acquire insurance to Lloyd's of London.
Right, yeah.
Because we would have had no insurance, and we had to come up with an insurance to satisfy the airport. Plus, he was also a pretty good friend of Mr. Swain, who at that point in time was the airport manager. And that's also helped us put a little feather in our cap, you know.
You can go on YouTube, and there were people that did movies of it, and there's movies of it on YouTube. And 49 the first year, or was it 47?
49.
Okay.
Well,
Lee was there.
I have a lot of still pictures, and
Yeah.
some of them are in Tony's book, and some of them you saw tonight here earlier.
But Bob became a very, very well-known race engine builder. And I built 2 vintage race cars at his shop. And he would take, if he was doing a race motor, like a Chevy V8, for example, which were in my Corvettes, he would take that motor apart and put it back together 9 times. And he would measure it, and he would take it apart and do a little machine work on something. He'd put it back together, measure it again, take it apart until he got it just right. And the guys at the vintage races were sure that I had a cheater motor in my car. They figured it was a big motor. They all thought that I was cheating, and I told them I didn't have to cheat because Bob was building my motors. I said they're just a bunch of amateurs and they don't know what they're doing.
I'm sure they love that.
Oh yeah, I was real popular.
I heard somebody say dry lake bed and going off into the middle of nowhere, so that's my transition to Bonneville. What do you think, Seth?
To start with Arlie, he's been there longer.
Okay,
than
we'll do that. Tell us about Bonneville. I mean, since you're still in the cockpit, so tell us about what it's like to go at that kind of speed.
Well, it's a vast wilderness of salt. It's really a unique place on Earth. It's been rained out in the last couple of years. It has a problem with Mother Nature back there. But the reports are this year that everything's are looking good, and they're out there dragging the courses. For the meet will be coming up first weekend of August, so we're prepping our car to go back there.
Yeah.
And
that was always tied together.
well, it's
same time.
I can remember one race that I ran back there in 1966 when I drove Jack Quinton's Roadster. He was an old-time land speed racer from here in town. And drove it the full 5 miles, went out the back door, went down there, stopped and got out. And it was such a serene atmosphere. It was like you're on the moon. There was nobody around, no noise, dead quiet. All I could hear was the hot engine clicking and clanking, cooling off. And it was really a different place. And I walked around the car trying to wear off the adrenaline that I just built up. And where are those guys? Nobody's coming to get me. You couldn't hear. There was nothing, no sound, nobody in sight. And finally, then I seen them come down, the push truck come down to get me. He said, we couldn't find you. You went way down here.
Oh my God.
So it's a different type of racing. And we got a tall order in store for us. We run a blown fuel streamliner class, and the record is 423 miles an hour. Wow. 2 years ago, we ran 417, so we're short. And we'll be going back there and trying again.
What goes through your head? I mean, I was thinking, what goes through your head when you get 200, 300, and then 400?
Well, 400, I just did it that one time, so I'm not used to it. So it's actually, you're in a different zone, different place. It's things are happening in a hurry. You know, they got mile markers, 1 mile, 2 mile, and then I can remember, there goes a 4, here comes the 5. So I knew I was going fast. So you're going by those miles in a big hurry. And it gets your attention to what you're doing.
I have to ask, my heart, I mean, I did 110 once eating a hamburger, and then my heart was pounding out of my chest. So if you hit 400, I mean,
can you feel your heart pounding? Like I'm hitting 400 miles an hour right now. 300.
Well, holding your breath. Come on, baby, let's do it. And trying to concentrate on keeping the car from wandering around and getting ready to release the parachutes because there comes the 5, time to shut it off. So there's a lot of things to keep your mind occupied while you're going down there. You're not thinking about, oh, what's my heart doing?
And Ed, you've been out there motorcycles. Talk about that.
Not at Bonneville, no.
No, you
no.
El Mirage?
Our father was the motorcycle racer in the family.
Okay.
Back in the day, he bought the first 80 cubic inch Harley VLH from Art Mullaney in December 1935. And there's an interesting story that goes with that motorcycle is that Dad had what they called a big car. Danny Oakes referred to them as big roadsters. And he raced at Legion Ascot in 1935. He spent a lot of time at Legion Ascot running the big roadster. And our mother insisted that he stop driving because it was too dangerous. And he agreed and immediately went out and bought the biggest Harley Davidson he could find and started racing that because it was safer. And I remember a couple of names from my early childhood. I don't believe I ever met these men. I was too young, but Walter Docker and Putty Mills names stuck in my head. And up to about 17 years ago, I was fairly sure that they had both passed away and were gone when I was introduced to Walter Docker. I didn't tell him I thought he was dead, but he could probably tell by the look on my face that I was in awe that I was actually talking to Walter Docker. So he said there are other members of the Santa Barbara Motorcycle Club. As it turns out, these guys were younger than my father, and they're a group of guys that had formed a club called the Alumni Club, and they met at Harry's Plaza in the Gold Room every Wednesday afternoon and had lunch and a meeting, and he invited me to come to one of those meetings. So I did. I went to the meeting, and the stories that these guys would tell about what they did in the 30s and 40s racing around Santa Barbara kept me coming back. So I used to like to sit next to Walter Docker, and one day I asked, Walt, what year did you get in the Santa Barbara Motorcycle Club, Walt? And he said, 1937. He said, I was 17 years old. And he started to tell me about helping out with the Gibraltar Dam race. And everybody there knew about Gibraltar Dam race. Started at 12 o'clock at night, the first Saturday after New Year's. And they were out at Romero Canyon. They'd race up the fire roads and deer trails and whatever gates they could get open to get to Gibraltar Campground. But Walt said 1937 was the last time we ran the Gibraltar Dam race up San Marcos Pass. And really, he said, yeah, we started at the bottom of the pass, which is today where San Marcos Road goes through the housing tract from Foothill Road up to where it crosses Maria Ignacio Creek. There's a small bridge there before it starts winding up what we now call the Old San Marcos Pass. They would meet there at 12 o'clock at night. Every 2 minutes, they'd release a motorcycle to go up the pass, and it was a timed event. The guy that got from there to Gibraltar Campgrounds in the shortest time won. So in 1937, there was a car coming the other way from San Ynez over the pass. There was an accident. 2 of the motorcycles were involved, and Highway Patrol showed up. And I imagine they said something like, what the hell are you guys doing up here? So from 1938 to 1961, and this, by the way, is the perpetual trophy for that meet. It goes back to 1925. So they continued the race up Romero Canyon and up the back roads off-road ever since then until 1961. So after Walt told me that story, I decided somebody has to save the history that's in the memories of these old club members, because nobody's written anything down. When they pass away, these stories are going to be gone. So I hired Dajan Productions to start a documentary film interviewing Tony Rios, Buddy Mills, Walter Docker. And documentary filmmaking can get very expensive, so when I'd spent all the money that I was willing to put up out of my pocket, I stopped filming and went looking for a sponsor. About that time, I went down to Ventura to a car show, and I was introduced to Tony Baker. And Tony's telling me about his hot rod books that he's writing, and I'm telling him about my motorcycle documentary film. And he said, you know, my publisher wants me to write a motorcycle book about particularly Santa Barbara. With all this information you have, would you be willing to write a motorcycle book? I said, yeah, I can do that. So Tony promptly went to his publisher, and produced a contract for us to sign, and he became my mentor, taught me how to go about writing the book, when to write the chapters, when to write the page numbers, and all the hoops that you jump through with Arcadia Publishing. And he even wrote some of the captions for the book that went into the book. And about 8 months later, we had the book, which is over here on the table, Motorcycling in Santa Barbara County. And probably one of the most interesting race courses that is in the book was La Conchita. There's a picture in there from an old album that no one knew the origin of. It's an old black-paged album from the early 20s. Someone found it at a garage sale and bought it, recognized that it was about the club. But the origin of that was never, they assumed maybe it was a Santa Barbara Motorcycle Club album. But there's a picture in there from about 1920 of La Conchita hill climb races up that bank that they had the slide on a few years back. And that went on up into the 50s. I have newspaper articles from 1958 of hill climbs still going on there, and they had what they called scrambles, probably a tourist trophy race down in the flatland. All the houses were not there in those days. The other interesting race course would be Pershing Park. I have a program from 1933 for Pershing Park, and they advertised that the latest motorcycle racing was called European Short Track Races, which eventually became known as Speedway Racing. So in 1933, they were running Speedway motorcycle races in Pershing Park. There was a stadium there with covered bleachers. About in the parking lot between the Carriage Museum and where the baseball diamond is was a stadium there. And in 1934, I have a program from Pershing where they ran midget cars with the small Offenhausers in them. And
Are you one of those?
Yeah, I do.
there were probably a dozen race tracks in this area that the guys would tell me about that none of them survive today. They're all gone. Elings Park, for example, is there, but that was the Veronica Springs Hill Climb course. Started back in the 20s. There's pictures in the book of probably late 1920s. The original course was on the west side of Las Positas, where you look up at the palm tree lined driveway that's up there. That was the original course in the 20s. It was they called it the Big Hill. The next course was set up over where the tennis courts are at by Elings, and they got to where they would actually go stop traffic, go to the other side of Las Positas for the motorcycle drag races up the hill. So that kind of prompted them into moving the course farther up. It's up by if you go up the driveway into Elings Park, you go past the BMX bicycle course. If you look to your right, there's a hill right there, and that's where the last.
I would imagine you have some of these photos in the book.
There's several photos of that in the book. There were courses all over town. Isaac Walton Field, which is, if you go west on Foothill, you go under San Marcos Pass, under that underpass, and then on your right there'll be some county buildings there. Just beyond that was called Isaac Walton Field, and they had road races there. I have a program from 1940, motorcycle road races at Isaac Walton Field. And they had races at, they raced down at the Thunderbolt, had motorcycle races down there. At what they call the Lemon House track, where the rescue mission is now on Yananali Street. Yananali Street wasn't there. There was a racetrack there that started in the 1920s and went on up into the 60s. Fox Canyon was just behind La Cumbre Junior High School. If you go up Portezuelo, between Portezuelo and the street below it was a tourist trophy course up there, TT track that ran.
I didn't realize there were so many tracks in town.
There were no cell phones. There were no computers to watch YouTube on. There were very few television in the 30s and 40s. Television were not popular.
Yeah.
So you had to create your own entertainment. And motorcycle racing seemed to fit that bill for a lot of people in Santa Barbara.
Well, hopefully people can pick up one of his books and see the old photos.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's interesting.
Well, that original hill climb, that property there was the original dump, the Santa Barbara dump.
Yeah. Well, later on, that became the city dump. But I don't know if it went back to the 20s. The original course was on the other side of Las Positas, so
well,
the 20s.
The original, as I recall, in the 40s, is on the road that when you entered to the dump.
Right.
And there was part way up there was a ravine like this that you went down then underneath the oak tree and then did the hill climb.
On the other side of the hill?
Yeah.
That was Santa Barbara Motorcycle Club's
that's where it started.
Practice course.
Then when they moved it around to Las Positas Road, actually there was 3 different hills they climbed there.
Yeah, there were several different hills there. Yeah, the last one was that I took the guys over there, Walter Docker and Tony Rios and these guys, after one of the lunches, and they were pointing out to me where the different courses
was there
were.
also. The long hill also went underneath the oak tree.
Oh yeah, going up to the start of the hill.
I'm curious about Seth. I started off with Seth. Seth, I was going to ask him about Bonneville. Give me your thoughts on Bonneville. You've raced out there as much as anybody in this group, right?
Well, Arlie started before I did. I started going up there as a crew member in 1963. I was 16 years old, and what's the name of the guy that had your Quentin? Quentin had a roadster and invited us to go and be helpers, and I caught the bug. But I didn't actually start racing there with my own race car until 1976. And that was a bicentennial year, and somebody had given me this old Bonneville Lakester, and we decided we were going to put an engine that we had built for another vintage race in it and race it at Bonneville. And so somewhere along the line, common sense prevailed, and we didn't end up using that engine, but we got a 2,000cc Ford Pinto engine, and we raced that in 76. Set a record at 140 miles an hour. So that was the first year we raced up there, but that was the beginning of the end. Then it was 42 years after that every year.
Your top speed there?
Well, my top speed, you actually misquoted it. I got to tell you, my top official speed was 316 miles an hour.
That's official speed.
But I went on my head at 324.
And then what happened?
Well, then we built a new car.
That's a good way to put it.
But the 323 speed was not mine. But the crash at 323 was mine.
Yeah. Tell us about that. What's it like to crash at 323 miles an hour?
Well, it was the second time I'd ever been in an ambulance, and the first time was at Lions Drag Strip. So what happens in an accident, I think, at the racetrack is you don't really remember what happened. Like you're talking about remembering your heart pounding when you're driving 120 miles an hour. And as Arlie said, I think that you're so concentrated on what you're trying to achieve that, as Arlie pointed out, you're worried about the mile markers, you're worried about whatever. So you're not really thinking about crashing, because none of us would get in a car if we thought we were going to have a wreck. We're absolutely sure that we're going to get to the other end and everything's going to be fine. So So I don't think, from my standpoint of view, I don't have any real recollection of. I just remember the car was really going. It was hauling ass, and the next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital in Salt Lake City, and Tanis was there, and I asked how the car was.
Is that one of the first things you said was, how's the car?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And of course, they said the car was fine, which was completely incorrect. Why would they tell me that it was a wreck?
It was good, yeah.
So, at any rate, but we did very well at Bonneville. We set, over the 42 years we raced there, we set, there's still 10 or 12 records in the book. We ended up putting 7 people in the 300-mile-an-hour club.
Yeah.
So we did.
Another one's sitting right here in the front row.
Why don't we
Tanis.
have some female representation?
I was about to say, why don't you talk to Tanis?
Come on, Tanis.
So I'll read this. Seth and Tanis were competitors for each other on the Salt. Quote, "If Seth can do it, I can too." And she did. And with a timed two-way run of 321 miles an hour.
Well,
yeah.
I don't want to be get up there.
Well, Tanis, I'll ask you
Hello.
the same question.
Hello.
Yeah. What's it feel like to hit 300 miles an hour?
You know, listening to Arlie tell what it's like to be in that car, my heart started pounding because it's so real. It's exactly what Arlie said, and it really doesn't matter how fast you're going. That's the same feeling that anybody has. I mean, you're just holding that steering wheel, just saying, just hold together, because you're so sure that the motor's going to come apart. But because the motors are so loud, and that's the thing now about us not racing at Bonneville that I miss. It's the sound of the motors. So when, you see somebody on the street and they're kind of having fun with their car, and I go, God, that's so cool. And the next person will say, oh, why did they have to do that? Well, you don't have much to talk about with those people, but yeah. So one of the things that if I were to describe, I didn't have a father who was a racer. He was an electrician. So my inspiration has been Seth, and just watching him build cars and race and have fun, and all the great friends that he's got. There is something about a car guy. And so I was taught to manually shift when I was 14 by my brother, and I was in love with cars anyway. So meeting Seth, he was like, he had all the components of exactly what I wanted. So
here I thought it was me.
No, but then when he started allowing other crew members to drive the car, I thought, well, okay, I'll just put it out there and see if I could do it. And he said, okay, well, we'll discuss it. The guys had to agree, and there had to be a record that I would stand a chance for. So yes, anyway, so one of the things that is kind of interesting, because at that time I had 3 small children. And the thing about having children, it's a big responsibility. What's mom doing? No, she's out there killing herself. Well, no. So starting off in the car, and what you'll say yes to when you get your helmet and your fire suit on in a garage, and what you're going to do at Speed Week with hundreds of cars and hundreds of people standing around you, it's a different deal. So when I got in that car and that motor started, and it was so loud and so amazing, and I started off and I got this like, what am I doing? I've got 3 little kids. And it was like a wave. What am I doing? I'm having the time of my life. And at that point, I was hooked. So we've set a lot of records, and we've had a lot of fun. I think I had more runs in the last car, which I called the serious car, than really anybody. I don't know why that was. But
She was real good in the early days before we had computers to record the information. She was very good at remembering everything. And so we relied on her memory. And also what we found out later on as we got computers, she was able to shift the car faster than we were, the guys. So she could pick up a quarter of a second on 3 shifts. Well, that doesn't sound like much, but it equates to about 3 miles an hour at the end of 5 miles when you're going about 250 or 260 miles an hour. So it was a big deal. And then we used her for a guinea pig because we had this drag race transmission that you couldn't push start it. And we had to tie a rope around it. And she had to untie the rope after she got going. She was able to do all that stuff. So her performance was why she kept getting to get back in the car. It wasn't that she was cute or she did a good cooking job. Or we were pretty crude about, we were pretty serious about racing. So she did a good job. She was asked to drive. It was pretty simple.
What I find interesting is that your family vacations are all over 300 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Both of your kids have surpassed 300,
yes,
right?
Yes, our son and our daughter, yeah. Well, anybody that thinks that Bonneville is a vacation is nuts. You go to Bonneville and then you want to go on vacation. Yeah. No, it's a real
But that's pretty
challenge.
amazing to have an entire family over the 300 club.
Yeah.
That's...
Yeah, there's one other family that has 4 members in the club. We have 4, but our whole crew is in the club, and our engine builder and our engine builder's daughter. So that's 7 people over 300.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, I think
That's
it's a
impressive.
real tribute to Seth that he allowed other people to drive. And that, when Bonneville started, nobody ever did that.
Yeah, if you look
really-
at pictures of her, the first year she drove, what was it, 87?
Yeah, 87.
Yeah, the guys were looking down their nose at her. And when we quit running in, 17 or something, there's 4 or 5 other women.
I was on record runs with 5 women, not all cars, a couple of gals on motorcycles. I don't care what we do in cars. Those gals out there on motorcycles, they're really good. So yeah, no, it's a challenge, but as Seth said, none of us feel like we're ever going to get into an accident out there. So but we have a lot of safety gear, and I think I had opportunities. I was asked to drive other people's car, but I had such faith in Seth's ability to build a good car and I looked at these other cars and I had no idea how they were put together.
But you saw how he was putting his together.
Oh yeah. He's a really good car builder.
I don't want to bring up a sore subject or anything. So your top official speed is what?
Well, my fastest speed is 323.
And Seth, yours is what?
Official is 316.
I know.
So I wasn't going to really say it that way.
I know, and see our daughter.
Do you rub it in every now and then?
Hey, well, I'll tell you a little rub-in story. So you go to Bonneville and you get in the 200-mile-an-hour club, and that's cool. And then if you go 300, you get in the 300-mile-an-hour club, or the 300-mile-an-hour chapter of the 200-mile-an-hour club. So Tanis actually one year set a record at 299.7 average, not in the club.
Wow.
So the next year she comes back and puts it over 300, and she gets a 300-mile-an-hour T-shirt and the hat, and I got the hat here, it says 300 on it. So I'm in the 2 club now. She's in the 3 club. So now we're doing laundry. She's doing laundry. Oh, I can't wash my 300-mile-an-hour clothes with your 200-mile-an-hour clothes.
Oh, some things are you just have to rub it in.
So yeah, it's a fairly competitive situation over there.
Right. Well, I had to ask the question because I knew I wasn't the only one thinking it. So, Tanis, thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. So, yeah.
Wow.
And thank you to all these fellows. My gosh.
Yeah.
This has been an amazing evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tanis. Any other Bonneville stories? Chip, you got anything that...
Well, I've been lucky enough to have painted several of these cars and for Seth and Tanis.
Yeah, I think he's painted every one of our Bonneville cars.
And actually, even the cars that they owned, I was working with my father painting those cars for the previous owners. And a lot of other teams I was able to paint their cars, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And I've been lucky to paint not just Bonneville cars, but top fuel dragsters and
good paint job makes it go faster, doesn't it? That's what I heard.
Well, I'll tell you a story about a paint job. Working with Mac Tools, they wanted me to paint Doug Coletta's top fuel dragster. And so normally I would just design the graphics and we would do a computer wrap. And I said to him, this year I'd like to actually paint it. I want to do it a real paint job like they used to do back on the cars, in the good old days. So this box shows up and it's, the whole thing's a trailer, and we pull this carbon fiber body out to, it needs to be painted. And I'm looking at it, and it's pretty wavy. So I wanted to fix that, and I went ahead and did that, and then painted it, and everything was painted. All the logos were all hand lettered and done like it would have been done back in the day. And we finished the whole thing, and I put it back in the box, and we ship it to them. And they call me up and say, "What did you do to this thing?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "You added 72 pounds to this body." It's every ounce counts in this. And I said, "Well, that body was really ripply." So we skim coated the whole thing with Bondo and blocked it straight because I wanted it beautiful. And they said, "Well, it is beautiful. And here's the good news. We will never use this body again because a regular computer wrap is 11 pounds. And I added 72 pounds to it. So they said, after this race, you can have that body. And it hangs in the ceiling of my shop today."
Oh, that's great.
Oh, my God.
But it did 332 miles an hour in the quarter mile.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing. Chip grew up, next door. His dad's body shop was next door to our welding shop. And when Chip was in high school, Chip would come down to the end of the street and down to the end of the driveway and bum materials to build his hot rods. He built his root beer truck and everything with stuff from our shop. So as life went on and Chip got popular, and I'd say, "Oh yeah, well, Chip's coming up this weekend," because he would like to come up to the shop and just hang out. Chip Foose? He's going to come to your shop. And so we've had this great, fun relationship because he likes to come up and hang out at our shop and just be the way it was, like he said, the good old days that he remembers. So it's a really interesting, fun situation for us because, he's a small town boy gone big time, and we're still old time Santa Barbara guys, and he likes to come back and hang out with us. And it's very, very rewarding for me to see somebody accomplish so much and yet not forget where he came from. And I will always be appreciative of that.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
So your dad wouldn't let you use the tools? You had to go next door to get them, or?
Well, my dad's shop, we were a paint shop and a fabrication shop, but Seth had all the really cool tools. So I'd come over there and, "Can I borrow this?"
Yeah, we just bought another cool tool the other day. Tanis asked me when I was going to stop buying tools. I said, "I don't know. I've got an answer for that question."
I am a tool junkie.
Yeah.
If I can afford it, I'm going to buy it. And the tough part is when you need to move them again. And I'm calling Seth, I need your crane.
Well, I was very fortunate to know Chip's father, Sam. He was younger than me, of course, but we became pretty good friends, and we were in the same car club together and so forth for many years. But I remember his dad when he was in high school. I was way out of high school then, but he had a Cushman motor scooter.
Yes.
Yeah. And he had it all painted up real neat and everything. Then he built the 42 Ford, the watermelon green car.
Yep.
And he and a couple of other guys that were all his friends, they all worked for this Mel Riles. They had Mel's Body Shop over on Milpa Street, and that's where they all began their trade.
Yeah.
And
is that what Sonny's moved?
So it's Sonny's eventually, yeah.
Boy, it's getting old home week around here.
His father, when he was building the green car, he built that in a gentleman's garage, and your dad was dating the daughter, and the older daughter was a friend of mine. So went back that far.
Wow. Was that the garage he was living in?
No, that was the that was the garage that his girlfriend at the time, his father had, right off of Milpas Street downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Dan,
my earliest memories.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
See, these guys are my heroes growing up. And the reason that I do what I do today is because I wanted to impress them. My dad was my hero, and when I was just a kid, I'd watch him building cars. And we left Santa Barbara when I was really young, and we went to work with Gene Winfield, or my dad went to work for Gene Winfield. And on the weekends, my dad would take me to the shop, and I would watch my dad and the crew build these really cool customs at AMT. That was the name of the shop. Well, AMT was also, the plastic model kits, AMT. So they were building the cars that were becoming the plastic model kits. I would watch them build these cars, and then it wasn't much longer that, after that my dad would bring these plastic model kits home, and I got to build the same cars that I watched them build. And then at the same time, Mattel Hot Wheels, they were building Hot Wheels of the same cars, some of the cars that they were building there. And to this day, I'm still living my childhood, but my goal was to make my dad proud of what I could do, because I wanted to do what he did, and to make all the guys that were in the car club and everybody that, I wanted to be like them. And that's who I am to this day.
Well, you did well. You're far superior.
Yeah.
Thank you, but it's,
Chip, you made everybody proud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pretty special.
I remember
That was the goal.
I remember drawing airplanes when you were young. You started drawing airplanes?
Airplanes, cars, whatever. I know that you're 34 and Seth's T. I probably drew those cars hundreds of times as a kid, because all the oldies but goodies, we'd go to the closed car campouts and mid-state rod run, and I was drawing everybody's car. I had sketchbooks. I still have those.
Really?
Sketchbooks to this day. I could open those up and find your cars that are in there. And now I'm lucky enough today, I own Seth's T-Bucket that he built back then.
That's cool.
Well, it's been an interesting trip. And I've been very fortunate to meet some very, very, very talented and wonderful people. And some of them are sitting right here right now.
I agree.
And I was fortunate enough to, at one time, I know Dan Hogan will remember this gentleman, Willis Baldwin. He built a sport car, and in 1949, when we had the drag races out here, well, he just lived up the street from me a little ways, and so I hung around his little shop. The old barn is what it was, but I watched him build this car. I helped him a little bit, but anyway, he used to let me drive it out in Montecito. We did some road racing on our own out there, and then in 1950, it had the first races in Palm Springs at an abandoned airport. And I was fortunate enough to drive the car for him. Well, I was only 20 years old, and you were supposed to be 21. Well, that was, so in order to enter the car, he entered under another person's name. Well, that was okay, I didn't care. I got to drive the car. Well, we did a little practice on Friday. The car ran really well. On Saturday, we had a preliminary race, which I won very easily with the car, because it was just the superior car at the time. And I think we ended up being either 6 or 8 seconds ahead of the next car behind us. And on Sunday, for the big race, they lined us all up. They put me in the back. And there was only, in this class, I think there might have been 8 cars, something like that. Well, the steward came over to me and he said, he started talking and said, well, now we have these rules that you know, you don't pass in the corners, you don't do this, you don't do that. And I'll go, wait a minute, you know, this is not the kind of racing I'm used to. You know, you pass wherever you could pass, or do whatever you had to do to pass. Well, it's a gentleman racing. So Mr. Ball was standing there. I said, well, what do you want me to do? He just grinned and looked at me and said, I want you to win. Well, I'll do my best. So we lined up, and I started the back of the 8 field. And I started the car had a kind of a miss in it, you know. And so I raised my hand because I wanted to have a second for them to come and look at the car, see what's wrong. Guy dropped the flag. So I thought, okay, well, I just hammered that thing, and I went through the first turn and the second turn, and I passed everybody, and I'm well in the lead, and I'm feeling pretty proud. All of a sudden, the car quit. We had ignition problems. So I was very, very disappointed because I really wanted to win that event for Mr. Baldwin and for my own pride, too, of course. But anyway, that particular car still runs in the Monterey Historic
Baldwin
today. And the man that owns it now has become a very good friend. And he's the one that sponsored me to get into this National Hot Rod Association. So that was a kind of an interesting little trip around the world. Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
Dan, did you have something did you want to talk about? I think you wanted to make a comment about Bonneville.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about the drag races, and I think I'm the only guy up here that had a drag race during a race at the Santa Barbara airport with a P-51 Mustang. Yeah, the track out there was 2.1. The longest straight was a half a mile. And right parallel to that straightaway was a still active runway. This was, I don't remember the year, it's not important. And it had been a foggy day earlier, no airplanes, it's too foggy. The fog started to burn off, and I don't even remember what car I was driving. But I came around turn 5, headed down the long half-mile straight, and there was a P-51 sitting there waiting for clearance to take off. Just as I came around turn 5, he got clearance, and this Merlin came. And I'm going down. I'm in a drag race with a P-51. One I'm sure as hell going to lose. And the end of that straightaway was what Robbie called it a sucker turn. It was real wide apron, and the best way around it was the natural line, but a lot of drivers would take that line because it was faster, but it was longer. That one lap, I got so distracted watching this P-51 take off and roar and take off and suck up his gear and off into the azure blue sky. God, this is once in a lifetime. And I missed my turn to the short way around and took the sucker turn and lost the position. Who owned that airplane? It was Mr. Gray, wasn't it? Gray? Wonder whatever happened. It was a real
red airplane.
Who could make it? I lost a drag race to a P-51.
Oh, I think we gotta wrap it up, don't we?
Well, we've got a few more
part of it.
minutes. I want to find out from Jim what happens when he takes a Chrysler motor and puts it in a 5-window Ford coupe.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's
what
a great
happened.
end.
City police are on you 24 hours. Well, again, my dad was a DeSoto Plymouth dealer, and I got my driver's license when I was 14 because I lived on a lemon ranch. So I was looking for a car to build a hot rod for the street, and I found a 32 5-window, planning a flathead like everybody else. And I got, and then Chrysler came out, 52 with a Hemi, DeSoto came out 53 with a Hemi. And I thought, that's over my head. That's not going to happen. So all of a sudden I got wind. There was an engine failed in a brand new 53 DeSoto, had a Hemi. So what's going to happen to it? I'm just all over, full of questions. And they said that they're waiting for the DeSoto factory man to come by and make a judgment. So I got wind he was coming. I was all over him. I mean, I was just on his body as he walked around, looked the engine over, and he said, junk it. So I had that home within 7 minutes. So there was no speed equipment for a DeSoto. And as I was building the car, adapting it for the Hemi, I found the JE made pistons, so I got some 10-to-1. Couldn't find the cams or anything else. So we made a, I think, 4-Stromberg carburetors, exhaust manifolding intake, and had it running. Later, I got wind that Chet Herbert, making the roller tablet cams, was interested in the DeSoto for a midget engine. So I called him, and I was lucky he answered. So I raced down there and met with him. As I remember, he was in a wheelchair, and he was very interested in it. He said, "I'd love to try it. I think, whatever." So he developed a roller tappet cam for it, but he had no accessories as far as cam follower guide and so forth. So I brought it home. That's in high school. So I worked all night, made a couple, like 3/4-inch angle iron, drilled in the block stud, all of this Mickey Mouse, the cam followers on both sides. And anyway, got it running. It's all seat of the pants, no dyno. And all of a sudden, I was running away from Flatheads. So it eventually, in the coupe, it would run 103, 105 in the quarter mile. So that started at Saugus, and then San Fernando and Santa Maria. So everybody was after me because everybody else is in Flatheads. And anyway, then I think a few years, I sold the coupe, saved the engine, put it in a Roadster that I bought from a guy, 32 rails, Model A Roadster. And again, that was carbureted, and it would run in the upper 100s. And I got the record at San Fernando at 118.9, and that held for quite a long time. Again, because everybody else is Flatheads, there were a few small block Chevys. So I was just king of the road. And the next step, I got a 471 blower off of a Detroit engine and Mickey Moused a intake manifold because nothing was made. And I was pretty good at stick arc welding. So, it was like angle iron sides and so forth and so forth. So I tacked it together. It looked like it fit pretty well. Then I welded it up. It was like a round ball on a flat table. It was just Mickey Mouse. So after a lot of surface grinding, I got that on, and I Mickey Moused a drive. Ended up using a chain drive, and then Hilborn injectors on top of the blower. And it would run in the the low 130s, 128s, 130s.
Yes.
But eventually, it would run 120 on gasoline. And that's about the end of the story.
Wow.
Ended up selling it, and
it's still around.
I have no idea where it is.
No idea where. Okay.
That was a hell of a junk engine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't you tell them what you drive today?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you tell them what you drive today? Your pickup.
Oh, the truck.
Well, I love to create and build things in business and cars. So my son wanted a pickup going to college. So he bought a used F-150 with a 6-cylinder standard shift. He graduated. We're trying to get rid of the pickup. He wanted a car. Nobody wanted that pickup with a 6-cylinder and standard shift. And there wasn't a scratch on it. So in the meantime, we rolled over a Peterbilt 18-wheeler in our business on the freeway. So that was totaled, and so they pulled the engine, the gearbox, and just for spare parts for the rest of the trucks. And that sat around, I don't know, maybe a year, the pickup. So I got the crazy idea. I put it in the bed of the pickup. So it's in backwards with a V-drive, and that's what runs the truck.
It's a monster. You brought it to Cars and Coffee a couple of times.
It's scary. It's crazy. It's
always
crazy.
Draws a
crazy
huge crowd. Yeah.
And then the front engine just idles. It runs the air conditioner or heat.
You gotta have a luxury, right?
Yeah. So it would do wheelies. Of course, it tore up a few things, so I stopped doing that.
So you can't take the kid out of the man, can you? You still got to pop wheelies in a pickup truck. It's got a diesel motor of the bed. It is a beast.
But
all right.
It looks like something he's just hauling. You know?
Yeah, it does too.
Yeah,
it kind of looks like he's hauling something, right?
CJ, I think we need to start wrapping this up.
I know. We're making the producers nervous. I know.
One of the neat things that happened around 1990, I think, Orwin, didn't you start to bring back the airport races? Or try to?
Yeah, I did it in conjunction. I did it in conjunction with the air show, which was every other year, and so there was a little car show going on out there, and so I went out and entered it one year, and it was just mismatched cars and stuff, and I said, you know, if you're going to do a car show out here, you ought to do a car show of the cars that either could have or did run at the Santa Barbara road races. That's how it all started. And Karen Ramsdale, who was the airport director at that time, was there, and so I mentioned it to Karen, and she says, that's a great idea for you. And so I said, okay. So I happened to be vintage racing a lot at that time, so I gathered up some of the vintage racing friends and tried to get a good, diverse collection of cars, and we had a show of vintage race cars that were of the period that would have run at the Santa Barbara road races. And so Karen comes up to me and she says, it'd be really neat if we could hear these things run. And I said, well, you could start them up. And she says, well, it'd be nice to hear them run and see them in motion.
Oh.
And I said, well, yeah, we could do that too. Well, do you think you could just get them out? And I said, well, there was a cone or something that was out there a ways. Why don't we just start them up, run them out, and bring them back? And she said, yeah, that'd be great. So we did it, and the crowd went crazy over it because they I guess they thought the road races were coming back. So then that was that year, and then when the next one was done a couple of years later, we actually had a little course. And so I had 50 cars or so that came to it, and I told the guys, I want this to look like a race. I don't want it to be a race, but I want to get out there and pass back and forth, and I don't want to, you know, wear your wear your helmet and your driving suit and have the pipes open. I want it to look and sound like the Santa Barbara road races. And so, well, you came up to those, didn't you? Didn't you come up to them, Mike?
We were going to, but 9/11 or whatever.
Oh, well, that
was
yeah,
a year later.
That was later, but we did I think 3 of these every other year, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger each year and became more and more and more popular. And then the last year, which was 9/11, I had a course. I spoke with a fellow, it was Chick Foley, I think his name was.
He was the head of the control tower.
Yeah, it was one of the officials out there. We had a course that was about 2.5 miles, which is about what the Santa Barbara Road Races course was. And I had 75 cars. I mean, everybody wanted to run in this thing. And so we were proceeding ahead with this thing. We had grandstands, and it got up to be about, then the 9/11 thing happened, and it got to be like two weeks before the event was supposed to happen, and we had to start writing all of the checks for the air acts and all of that, and they had already canceled, I think, the Reno air races. And that was, so we had to pull the plug on it, unfortunately. But that would have been, but in answer to your question, yeah, we did a demonstration. I wouldn't call it a race, but it really looked like a race. And I had Dick Goldstrand, who was a Corvette driver, well-known racer. He was the MC to the thing. We had corner workers, and it was a lot of fun. But yeah.
We've got about 4 minutes left for a few questions. If someone has a question for one of the panelists up here.
This question is for Mr. Harris about the Motor Monarchs from Ventura. How influential were the car clubs to you growing up, and some of the antics that
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
The Motor Monarchs?
Yes.
Ventura Monarchs. Could you discuss the car club and how that was influential in your life?
Yeah, I was in Motor Monarchs, I don't know how many years. Went to Kansas to the national drag races. I think there were 5 of us, 5 cars.
Yeah. Anyone else?
This is for Dan Hogan.
Yes.
Dan, what were the safety requirements for your SCCA racing over in Hawaii at the time, just to give people an idea of the safety requirements?
Safety requirements?
Yeah. If there were any.
You had to have a seat belt. They were pretty lax.
Don't run it.
Racing back in that day was a lot different than it is now. You did have to go through tech inspection, and that was kind of a joke. And there were a lot of cars that were in the race that were definitely illegal. I was one of them.